Hello, everyone. So we are going to discuss Chapter 3, Federalism in this video. So let's go ahead and get everything kicked off. Hopefully everyone is doing well with all of the material. Based on your quiz grades, I would say everyone is understanding everything like they should, which is fantastic. So hopefully that is really the case and you guys aren't just like guessing, right? Like let's hope that's not the case. It looks like on my end that you guys are really getting it, so that's terrific. Let me get everything set up here really quickly. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and get started then on Chapter 3, Federalism. So at the beginning of your chapter 3, you'll see the images that are on your screen. It says, in March of 2020, President Trump visited the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, so CDC. And the reason for the visit was to discuss the availability of coronavirus testing in the United States. While there, he asserted that there were plenty of tests in the country for anyone who wanted one, though this quickly proved not to be the case. To increase testing capabilities, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, offered emergency power to the states to authorize private labs to process coronavirus tests, like the San Diego facility that was pictured here in your book. So, and that was all over the news, of course, and that was definitely something that caused some issues with the administration. There was some, like PR cleanup that had to happen. And some of that was probably him like trying to reassure people, and probably him jumping the gun and speaking before he had all of the information that he needed to be able to be accurate. So federalism in general is the system of government where power is divided between a central government, which is like at the national level, and then regional governments, so like our state government, for example. So that's how federalism is divided. So our system is different from certain other government systems. So your book contrasts federalism with a unitary system. So a unitary system is a centralized government system in which lower levels of government have little power independent of the national government. And that's not the case with federalism, because the states have quite a bit of power, actually. So lower levels of government in a unitary system basically implement decisions that the central or top level of government basically put forth. But in our system, that is not the case. Nations with diverse ethnic or language groupings are more likely to have federal arrangements, like Switzerland and Canada. Come on. Okay. Having a little PowerPoint difficulty. So one of the things that you'll find with federalism is that some of it's trial and error, right? Like, how much power does each segment of government really need to be effective in that particular system in that particular time? And that's basically what we're going to be focusing on in this chapter. And we'll talk about the different types of federalism that we have had throughout our history and where we are today with that setup. So there's a lot of competition between states and like counties and cities to get individuals and businesses to, to be part of like the economic source in that area, to bring businesses, to bring jobs, that kind of thing, and to maximize the government services that are available for people and businesses. So in America's federalism, again, it's different in other areas, but for us, a key characteristic is the division of labor at different levels of government. So there are, there's obviously labor like at the national level and the state level and the local level. And so it's dividing up the duties and saying, okay, you guys handle this and we'll handle that. So this makes what's known as intergovernmental relations, which is the process by which the three levels of government, national, state, and local, so locals like your county and your city, negotiate and compromise over policy responsibility and like basically who's going to take on what task to make sure that things run smoothly in our government as it's needed. So, so that's our, our particular system. So the Constitution talks about two types of government. It doesn't discuss local government, like it doesn't talk about cities and counties. It only talks about national government and state government. And it focuses on different types of power within government. And you'll see this again. So you want to make sure you know the difference in these two, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So there's express powers and there are implied powers. So express powers is what is like laid out verbatim, like the Constitution says, this is what you'll do. That's an express power. So the official definition says specific powers granted by the Constitution to Congress in Article 1, Section 8, and to the President in Article 2. So there are 17 expressed powers that you'll find in Article 1, Section 8. And then there are, for Congress specifically, and then there are implied powers. So this is not specifically laid out like, you know, you'll do this A, B, C, D, and E, but it's based on the fact that we have what's known as a necessary and proper clause. So the definition of a necessary and proper clause, it states in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that it provides Congress with the authority to make all laws necessary and proper to carry out, I apologize, to carry out the express powers. So basically, okay, this is what we have to do from the Constitution, but how are we going to get those things done? So it says like we need to collect money. Okay, well, how are we going to like levy taxes, right? Like, what are we going to implement to make that happen? And so that is an implied power under the necessary and proper clause of like, how do we get the job done that the Constitution endows us and calls us to do? So it's what things do Congress and the president have to put in place to be able to accomplish what the Constitution says that they have to accomplish. So hopefully that that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to email me, or like if you need like specific examples or whatever. So there's also something known as the supremacy clause that's laid out in the Constitution. So so sorry. So the supremacy clause is simply that what's laid out at the national level of government and in the Constitution is the like top dog, numero uno, like that is the way it goes. That's the law of the land. I'm actually trying to find where in the world they've put it in your chapter so I can give you like a page number to go to. It's not where I thought it would be. Give me just a second. Maybe it might have been listed in the last chapter and I'm just blanking on it, but it should also be listed in here. Okay, so they don't have it like on the side with the definitions like they usually do, but on page 64 at the end of the powers of the national government section, it says, the Constitution affirms the power of the national government in the supremacy clause, which is in Article 6, which made all national laws and treaties the supreme law of the land. So a state cannot issue something that is in direct contradiction with the national law. It has to be in alignment with it, as well as with the Constitution. And if it's in conflict of that, it will be deemed unconstitutional and will be struck down as an invalid law. So, like the Constitution says that, no government entity will create a religion. So if Florida says, hey, we're all Protestant now, that's unconstitutional and that would be struck down, right? That's kind of a very broad, I'm so sorry. A very broad one, but like hopefully that kind of like help clears that up some. So anytime that there's a conflict, like if there's a law in the book in a state and there's a different law at the national level, the national law always wins, hands down. It has more authority than the states. So, so you need to know that as well. So we have 27 amendments total, which I talked about in the chapter 2 lecture. The first 10 are the Bill of Rights. The 10th Amendment says that anything that's not laid out in these amendments, anything that's not listed in the Constitution is reserved and left to the states to deal with. So the 10th Amendment basically shows a strong role for state government in a way that unitary systems do not have. So the 10th Amendment is also known as the Reserved Powers Amendment. So your book defines that as powers derived from the 10th Amendment of the Constitution that are not specifically delegated to the national government or denied to the states in the Constitution. So if it doesn't say the national government handles this or the states are not allowed to handle this, it's left up to the states. So that's the 10th Amendment. So the anti-federalists were very anti-large government. They're the ones who pushed for the Bill of Rights. They're the ones who pushed for this 10th Amendment and was like, listen, like, we don't need y'all just like scooping up all the power. And then the citizens like not having any, like, that's why we have state level and national level. And we need to make sure that that we have our civil liberties in check. So that's where the 10th Amendment derived from. So you want to know what the 10th Amendment is, you'll be seeing it again. So one of the things that the Constitution discusses as well is police power. It's power reserved to the state government to regulate the health, safety, and morals, which obviously are subjective, of its citizens. So it talks about how one way in which the framers preserved a strong role for the states and federal systems was through the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which says that the powers the Constitution does not delegate to the government, national government, or prohibit to the states are reserved to the states respectively. Anti-federalists definitely wanted that with the reserved powers. And then other things that they realized that they needed were to make sure that there was, I mean, as cheesy as it sounds, like law and order, right? So because of that, they implemented the police power. So that's why in general, like if there are riots, if there are violent protests, if there's, just some kind of crazy going on, then the states and the local governments handle that. Like, that's why, it's like the sheriff's office and, state troopers and that sort of thing. And why you don't automatically, you don't see like soldiers from, like the army necessarily coming in. Like you might have the National Guard, like in case of, like a natural disaster or something that, is activated. But generally speaking, it's more, like your local police or your local firefighters or whatever. But other resources can be called in by the state if need be. So it's basically to literally keep things in check and to make sure that there is consequences for people who like do things that we as a society agree based on our laws is not okay. So so police powers was to make sure that states can protect the people, right? And your book talks about coercion, where for the power to develop and enforce criminal codes, to administer the health and safety rules, and to regulate the family via marriage and divorce laws. So it really is just to have a system of organized laws and organized systems. So it's just not, we're not just like the wild, wild west where everything was lawless and you dealt with it in a gunfight, right? So that was the whole point in the police powers, to, for civility purposes. So there are some powers that both the federal, I'm sorry, not, I'm going to try not to use the word federal, because I tend to use federal when I talk about like national, which you hear a lot of people refer to, but for the purposes of this chapter, that gets really complicated because federalism is all of it. So, so national level of government and state level of government a lot of times have authority that they share. Okay, so so what the book refers to as concurrent powers. So which is the authority possessed by both state and national governments, such as the power to levy taxes. Now, if you've always been a Florida resident, you're going to go, state taxes, what? Some states do levy taxes, like you have to file like a federal tax return and a state tax return, depending on the state you're in. But Florida does not, I'm sorry, does not have that. North and South Carolina do. And I just know that because I have family and friends who live there and have talked about it. And I think Alabama, but don't quote me on that. I'm really not sure. But that's just one example that your book utilizes. So if Florida wanted to, they could issue state taxes and they could collect taxes in the same regard that, like the national level of government does when it's time to file your taxes with the IRS. Obviously, there are other taxes that we pay on a local level. We pay sales tax and we pay, whatever tax they feel like implementing. And so that's one of the things that like both national and local governments are able to do. So, so here are some other things. They're both both levels are able to charter banks. Like you can have a national bank, you can have state banks. You can grant or deny different licenses to businesses or professionals. That's to open up a business. That's to, like usually you have to file like at the state level if you want to like become a business to get like an LLC, to get an EIN number, those sort of things. Like that can be done at the state level. It can also be done at the national level if you're a larger company. They can regulate conditions of labor to make sure that there are, the minimum wage. So each state like has different, like there's like the federal minimum wage, right? And then some states go above that, but they have to maintain like the minimum of that. The work week, and states can issue things in addition to what the federal government says. Okay, like these are the minimum, like here's the minimum wage, here's like what a work week looks like, here's how workman's comp looks like, and then the state can add to that as well and say also our state wants to make sure that this is protected when it comes to labor. So and that just varies from state to state on what they want to do. So so the caption for this picture says, as businesses like this bakery in Arizona push the limits of stay-at-home orders during the coronavirus pandemic, police officers stepped in to enforce the state's authority to regulate the public health and safety of citizens. So that's a perfect example of police power, and that is on page 66. So, so you'll need to know police power. So the next clause that the Constitution talks about for federalism is something called the full faith and credit clause, also on page 66. It's the provision from Article 4, Section 1 that says the Constitution requires the states normally honor the public acts and judicial decisions that take place in, I'm so sorry, in another state. So, perfect example of that, gay marriage. So, different states had different laws about it. And when some of the more like liberal states like California and stuff passed it, anytime anybody took it to court to challenge whether the validity of it, or if they weren't allowed to marry and they challenged the validity of it, and then a judge said like, yes, they have the right to do that, like that's a protection of their constitutional freedoms, because it was declared that way in one state, it should have been that way in all states, because it's the full faith and credit clause to basically honor what was decided in another state. So, but of course, as we know, states fought that. And so eventually it ended up before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed that it should be allowed. And therefore, like all the states that were fighting it had to get on board. So that was one of the things that was used in the argument for same-sex marriage. So until recently, it was definitely looked at, like interracial marriage had looked at one time where it was not allowed for a while. So your book discusses suggests some different pieces of information for that. So not just like same-sex marriage, but at one time interracial marriage was the same issue. So in 1952, 30 states prohibited interracial marriage, and many of these also refused to recognize such marriages performed in other states, which is exactly what happened for people of same-sex marriage. For example, in the 1967 Supreme Court case of Loving v. Virginia, which successfully challenged state bans on interracial marriage, Mildred and Richard Loving, a Black woman and a white man, were married in D.C. Oh, sorry, Nat. However, when they returned to their home state of Virginia, it refused to recognize them as a married couple. So we at one time had what was known as the Defense Against Marriage Act, which was put into place in 1996, that said states didn't have to recognize same-sex marriages in another state. But what got the Supreme Court to kind of strike it down was, again, by creating DOMA, that was in direct violation of the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution. So, so the Supreme Court said, okay, like we can't keep doing this back and forth. So there was a court case in 2013 called States v. Windsor, which your book kind of hits on, I believe. No, it doesn't. Yes. So DOMA was struck down by United States v. Windsor, and then there was another case in 2015 called Obergefell v. Hodges, which challenged 4 home states' refusals to grant same-sex marriage license or recognize same-sex marriages performed out of state. It was a 5-4 ruling, so it was close, but that meant that everybody had to be allowed to be offered marriage licenses to people of the same sex or opposite sex, as long as they were of legal age. So those things struck down the discrimination that had been happening. And a lot of people, you know, depending on their personal beliefs, have issues with same-sex couples and same-sex marriage. But at the end of the day, that's what was decided by the Supreme Court. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have had the same sort of experiences where most of the people who have issue with same-sex marriage, it's a lot of times for religious reasons, right? Like they don't believe that that's in alignment with their like personal religious beliefs. But it's very important to remember that we are a secular country based on secular values, and we have separation of church and state for a reason. A church does not have to marry people that they are not comfortable with, but that's completely separate from a state issuing a marriage license and people legally being allowed to marry. Like a notary public can marry someone, a boat captain, I think an attorney as well. Like there are a lot of people, like you can get ordained online, like you can have a friend marry you, like so if there's a particular church that's like not comfortable with it, they don't have to issue the marriages. But marriage is actually, for governmental purposes, it's just a contract between the two individuals and the state that says, okay, we'll file taxes together, like we're bonded financially, really, like more than anything else. And you can pull the plug on that person if need be. So like the whole, well, my religion doesn't agree with, like, you have to put a pin in that and solely focus on what does the law say, like, because we as a society, with our government structure, do not go based on any sort of religion, right? So you have to look at it in terms of, well, what does the law say? What does the Constitution say? And if our laws are in contradiction with that, then we have to fix that. And so that's what finally happened with the Supreme Court. So, so the 2015 case basically said that the 14th Amendment guaranteed people the right to be able to do that. Now, I do not have the entire wording of the amendments memorized. That'd be awesome if I did, but I'm not that good. So I'm going to go back here and read the 14th Amendment. So 14th, okay. So this talks about citizenship rights in Section 1, apportionment of representatives in Congress in Section 2, persons disqualified from holding office in Section 3, public debts being valid in Section 4, and then Section 5, the power to enforce this particular article. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So, and that's incredibly important, equal protection. So it doesn't matter if you don't agree with it or if you think it's icky or whatever, like it's an equal protection. Like, okay, they're a citizen of the United States. And if, heterosexual couples can get married and have licenses issued by the state, then so can same-sex couples. So it required all 50 states to be able to offer marriage licenses to people of the same sex. And then all states had to recognize same-sex marriages, regardless of where the marriage license came from. So this all reinstated the full faith and credit clause as it applies to same-sex marriage. So, so the next clause that federalism discusses is the comity clause, which talks about, I just saw it. Something I was going to go, oh, okay, here we go. So Article 4, Section 2, known as the Comity Clause, seeks to promote national unity by providing citizens enjoy the privileges and immunities of one state, and they should be entitled to similar treatment in other states. So it's almost like a continuation of the full faith and credit clause, right? So so basically, a state cannot discriminate against someone from another state or give its own residents special privileges that others do not get. So it regulates criminal justice among the states, where states have to return fugitives to others. So like if somebody flees and they have a crime in Florida, they end up in Virginia, and they get caught in Virginia. Virginia has to return them. I'm sorry, I'm going to be fighting that gnat all night until I get it. So they have to return them to Florida for sentencing. So, which is all part of like that, states working together to honor, policies and laws and stuff of each state. So it's kind of similar in the way the full faith and credit clause work, right? So now the problem with that is before, like we ended slavery and things like that, that wasn't the case, right? Because there were some states who abolished slavery, who had different laws to protect African Americans and Black people who were born here in the States. And then there were states that did not. And so it was very different from state to state on such a large level. So in the 1970s, the Supreme Court struck down an unconstitutional law in Alaska that gave Alaska residents preference over non-residents for jobs in the state's oil and gas pipelines. And so that was struck down, saying, no, like that's not fair. The Comedy Clause also regulates the criminal justice. So it all kind of goes hand in hand, like honor each states and their laws, and everybody should be following suit. So there's some sort of concurrent rules. There's like enough similarity across the board where people aren't moving, across country and now all of a sudden their marriage isn't honored, or they're, they are treated completely differently, and excluded based on other things. So sorry. I have a lot of trouble breathing for different conditions and reasons. So I end up yawning a lot, whether I'm tired or not, to help get the airflow in. So I'm so sorry, because I know that probably makes people tired as they're watching it. So, like I mentioned before, local governments are not addressed in the Constitution. But the 10th Amendment, that whole whatever is not listed is left up to the states. So that's why local governments are created and ruled and managed by the states, because federal government or national government has no say in it, because the Constitution doesn't reference it. Most states give larger cities what's known as home rule, which is power delegated by the state to a local unit of government to manage its own affairs, like New York City, right? Like the state of New York isn't going to micromanage New York City because it's such a large entity. Same with Atlanta or LA or, Houston or Dallas or something like that. Orlando's kind of the same way. I don't know if Tallahassee would fall into that, but I guess so. It's a larger, at least for our state. So in recent years, some local governments have passed laws only to have state legislators remove that authority. So it depends on the state as to whether or not they're comfortable with home rule, or if they want more control over what their localities do and do not do. So this table is on page 67. So it gives you a breakdown of the types of government we have in our country. Obviously, we have one national government. We have 50 state governments, right? Those are easy numbers. So there are over 3,000 counties in the United States. What? And of course, it depends on the state as to how many counties there are. Like out in rural areas like North Dakota and South Dakota, they don't have as much divided up because a lot of it's like farmland and stuff, and it just doesn't have a large population. So it just depends. And you'll never get me to understand the likes of Duval County. If anybody's familiar with Florida, why is it's such a large area. Duval, it's just Jacksonville and whatever little suburbs around it, right? But it's massive. It's such a large county. And then you see some of these other counties and you're like, why is that even a county? It's so tiny and there's nobody there. So sometimes it feels like there's no rhyme and reason to how those are divvied up. So over 19,000 municipalities. So like in Bay County, for example, we have the city of Springfield, Callaway, Panama City Beach, Mexico Beach, the city of Parker. I know I'm forgetting Lynn Haven. I think that's everybody. People who aren't from here, when I meet them, they're always like surprised by how many cities there are and for the size of our county. People are like, really? like why the need for so many cities? And I'm like, you're asking the wrong person. Like somebody probably got mad and said, screw you guys, I'm going to create my own little city over here. I mean, like, look at Parker. It's so tiny. Like you sneeze and blink and you're like in and out of the city in the same breath. It could easily be absolved like into Springfield or Panama City or Callaway, which all surround it. But like the 20 people who live in Parker would not hear of it. So, you know, and if you're like one of those 20 people and you love Parker and you feel like it's necessary, I apologize. I'm not trying to offend Parkinians. But it is a very teeny area. My grandmother lived in Parker the majority of the time that I've been alive, until she got a little bit older and then moved somewhere, you know, else in town. But I just never understood. I mean, like just the teeniness of Parker. It's crazy. Much like the vastness of Jacksonville being pretty much all of Duval. So equal parts ridiculousness, if you ask me. And then townships, which are one of the ways that people break up their localities. You know, we, at least in this area, like have like cities, right? Like it's not really like, we don't really have like a town. I mean, people will say like, okay, I'm driving into town, but like as far as formal government entities, ours are municipalities. There are almost 13,000 school districts within the country. And then other random little things that people have decided work for their area as special districts, which are over 38,000. So, and this is from 2017. So some of that might change, you know, once we have all the data from the 2020 election, but it's a lot, right? Like that's a lot of different levels of government. And to be able to manage all, like the national government wouldn't be able to keep up with all of that, right? Like that's too insane. If you look at a lot of other countries, I mean, like the United States is massive, right? Like we are an immensely large country compared to a lot of other, like you look at Canada and like Canada has like, they've got like territories, like, you know, like big segments that kind of look like states, but you know, they don't have nearly the population the United States has. So, so it's not nearly as full. And you look at like Central America, South America, whatever, like, and they've got like all these countries like in that where like, you know, the United States is just one country, but like a whole bunch of little states. And you look at like Europe, I mean, how many Italys could we fit, you know, like in the United States? Because a lot of people have said that, you know, it's kind of crazy that we're just one massive country, because in a lot of situations, it would have been broken up into like multiple countries. But that's just not how it ended up working for us. So we're kind of different like that. I mean, like you look at Russia, Russia is a massive country as well, but it's not divided up. You know, they have a very different like governmental system clearly than us. Same with China. China is huge, but, you know, obviously governed very differently. So, and then we have our weird little outlier there in the middle of the ocean, all by its, not in the middle of the ocean, but all by its lonesome with Australia, and then a little New Zealand off to the side. Being like its own continent and country because it's fancy. So, you know, our maps make no sense. Like we're just throwing darts, you know, like everything was just crazy as people were discovering things. And it's like, dibs, like I call dibs, you know? So, What are you gonna do? It is what it is. And for those of you who are like geography like nerds, I'm gonna end the share on the PowerPoint for a second. I want to show you guys something. So if you're a real geography nerd, you're already going to know this, but a lot of people take geography and never know this because it's not something that's taught in grade school. True world map. So everybody thinks they know what the world map looks like, but they're wrong. So everybody's used to like the usual, right? But I think this is going to be the most accurate. Yeah, this is a pretty good view of it. So it looks like everything's stretched, right? See how like everything's all stretched out, but that's actually like how everything is really laid out. Where before it like, you know, it's stretched out much differently. I'm trying to, let me see if I can find true world map to scale. Maybe that's how I need to look it up. Images. Yep, that's still what's coming up. So also when you look at like the map, the United States, because we do a lot of the printings. God, I'm an idiot. I'm sitting here going, so if you look here, but that only works if I share my screen. So I apologize. Give me a second and I will share my screen. My gracious almighty. Okay. Whew. Brain freeze. Sorry about that, guys. So if you look at the maps of other countries, so we do a ton of printing of the world's maps. We have skewed them and made it look like we are literally a bigger deal than we are. So like Australia and the United States are actually about the same size, as you can see in this picture here. If you look here, like we fit inside of Africa. But when you look at like the political maps, like Africa doesn't look quite as large. And it's all about placement to make people feel a particular way about like importance, which sounds crazy, right? Okay, so here, this is perfect. This overlays it. So the outline is what we see like on most maps. The green is how it really is. I know it's crazy, right? So think, this says, think Alaska was as big as Brazil. You can think the representation of the world printed on the maps, but that's not accurate. Like look at how like this looks compared, like how North America to South America looks. And then you look at how like we shrunk it in the more political maps. Look at how massive Africa is compared to the United States. But then when you look at the political map on just the outline, it looks much smaller, doesn't it? Same with Australia. We shrunk Australia, but it's actually much bigger. So this article, I will share this article, but most of the world maps are actually incorrect. Every map ever printed is wrong by definition. The job of a map is to provide a simpler representation of the world. A completely accurate map would need to be life-size, obviously. Worse, the earth is round and paper is flat. So unless you ask some people, there are still flat earthers out there who need to talk to some people. They need science in their life. So over small areas, the curvature isn't noticeable, but to unwrap the entire globe, you either have to stretch it out or cut it to make it fit on a flat sheet. There are lots of different ways to do this, but what's mostly widely used was one that was created in 1569. So it was done in a very, very skewed manner, but it's not accurate. So this doesn't talk about like the politics of why I will find some articles on the why, but a lot of people are not aware of this. And like, whoo, heaven forbid you tell somebody who went to school before some of this like came out as like being accurate. Ooh, talk about people getting mad. People do not like to be told that they were lied to by their teachers and by the government. So here's a good one. True scale map of the world shows how big countries really are. So this is Newsweek. So this helps give you so a mosaic of world countries retaining their correct size and shape is what you see above, which looks a little funky, right? It's not like really what you're used to seeing. And so it talks about like how it's laid out. So like Antarctica looks to be the biggest continent, but it's actually the 5th largest. Alaska takes up as much area on a map as Brazil, but in reality, Brazil is 5 times the size of Alaska. Greenland appears to be bigger than Africa on most maps, but Africa is 14 times the size. So this gives some good information. So I will post those articles. I didn't mean to get off like on a side note here, but it is important to, let me go back to the PowerPoint. So it is important to be aware that some things are done in a political manner that most people don't realize, and don't realize that like maybe what's been taught in the past is being controlled by, you know, like maybe the government for just various reasons, right? Like there's certain things that you don't learn in grade school that then you come to college and you're like, this is the first time hearing about this. And that happens a lot. I couldn't tell you how many times when I was going to college, I would like be excited about something new I'd learned. I'd come home and I'd tell my mom about it. I'd tell my grandmother about it. And they'd be like, what are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And then I'd have to like literally prove it to them because they would be so indignant because, you know, they're older than me and knew more than me and whatever. And they would just get downright mad that nobody was talking about whatever it was that like I had learned about. And that happens a lot. So the map is just a nice little example of that. So I don't even, oh, I was like, how did I even get off on the map tangent? I apologize. That was a very ADD rabbit hole that I took you guys on because I started talking about different countries and their governments and how things were laid out and how maps looked. That's how we got on that topic. I was talking about the United States and the different countries that could fit within it. Okay, so it did make sense. I'm so sorry for those of you who are like, I don't understand. What are we doing right now? But it is still very interesting to know. So I stand by my rabbit hole about maps. So, so federalism has shifted a lot. Let's redirect. So federalism has definitely shifted a lot over time and as to what makes sense for what is needed in that moment in our government. So originally, you know, the national government was not going to have a ton that it did. Like it just sort of, you know, like the basics and the things that like states couldn't handle. And then the states kind of did everything else. So the states definitely surpassed the national government for their power to influence Americans. So as far as shared powers, states played a more active role in the economy and social laws and regulations than the federal government did. However, when we have the Great Depression and then FDR was elected and the New Deal was formed to get us out of the Great Depression, a lot of that changed and the national government got a lot more power. And we'll talk about that in more detail as we kind of progress through the chapter, there's other times that we'll be talking about the Great Depression in more detail. So I won't like go into a ton of that for this particular lecture. So the states have asserted themselves at different times and said, hey, like, you know, you're trampling on us, like this is something that we should be dealing with. And then the national government may back off. And so depending on the policies and whatnot, and sometimes they have to take literally a court case to the national government and say, hey, like this is a state's issue, not a national issue. And then in other moments, things move towards the national government again, depending on what the situation is as to whether or not the states can really deal with it on their own. So, hello, okay. So the first type of federalism system is what we know as dual federalism. So that was a good chunk of our time, actually, 1789 to 1937. We lived in the era of dual federalism, which is defined as a system of government in which most fundamental governmental powers are shared between federal and state governments. So they work very hand in hand, like you handle this and I'll handle that. Federal government was really small and mostly dealt with commerce, building roads, protecting domestic industries with tariffs on imported goods, like the nitty gritty of like what we had to deal with our economy at the time. But it was about providing land and capital needed for economic development, and then the states kind of dealt with everything else. So the national government was focused on expanding our economy more than anything else. And as we were expanding out west, obviously we needed roads and we needed railroads and that kind of thing to be able to help connect appropriately. So on this table, which you'll find on page 71, the federal system, governmental functions, and the traditional system, or the dual federalism system from 1789 to 1937, you'll see where it lays down like what the national government did, state government, and then the local governments that had been established at that time. So you'll see that the states handled the vast majority of literally anything that needed to be done. I won't read all of this. You guys have your book. You can read all of that. So state legislators performed most of the governing for day-to-day stuff. They also dealt with certain level of economic regulation, other laws that needed to be done. You know, state property and trespass laws, that was all handled at the state level. Contracts, markets, banks, credit, insurance, like all of that none of that was handled at the national level. Until the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, property law extended to slavery. In other words, slaves were considered to be property. Free states without slavery were still required to return runaway slaves to the states from which they had escaped as part of the full faith and credit clause and the proper whatever, sorry, the privileges and immunities clause. Some states and individuals didn't really abide by that like they were supposed to, according to the immunities clause, but most people did abide by that. Come on. So under this dual federalism system, we also had what was known as the Commerce Clause in Article 1, Section 8, which delegates to Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. This clause was interpreted by the Supreme Court to favor national power over the economy. So Congress can tax as a result. They can create, manage an army. They can declare war. They can establish post offices for purposes of communication and all of that good stuff. And then, so as a result, the national government like really took the reins on the economy in a way that originally wasn't completely clear until the Supreme Court ruled it. So when the Supreme Court said, okay, that means that this is their job, then that kind of starts to shift a few things in the way that we see the country and federalism. But it takes a while before like we really come out of dual federalism. So both of these court cases affirmed the national government being over the economy. So McCullough v. Maryland was a court case that questioned whether government could charter a national bank. An explicit power granted or nowhere to be found in Article 1, Section 8. Chief Justice John Marshall answered that this power could be implied from other powers expressly delegated to Congress, such as the power to regulate commerce. His decision rested on the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8, basically giving Congress the power to enact whatever was necessary to create, to complete the express powers. And then the other case, Gibbons v. Ogden in 1824, reinforced that it was an issue about whether New York State could grant a monopoly to a steamboat company to operate an exclusive service between New York and New Jersey. They argue that the state lacked the power to do that. And then Chief Justice Marshall said that commerce among the several states was comprehensive, extending to every species of commercial intercourse. So anyways, I'm not going to bore you with like a ton of economic jargon, but it basically boils down to national government was over commerce and the economy based on the interpretation from the Supreme Court. So later on, the national government tried to take on a little bit more under its umbrella by regulating commerce for fraud, product quality, and child labor. But at the time, the Supreme Court said, no, that's a states' rights issue. You have no right to claim that as your own. That's unconstitutional. They said that the federal government was stepping on those toes of the state government. And so it was something that they were crossing the line on. To enter local workplaces was to exercise police power, which was reserved to the states. That was the Supreme Court's definition at the time. So everybody was fine with the government regulating businesses that cross state lines, because that makes sense, right? Like Florida and Alabama can't both rule if it like crosses state lines. Like who's not like a vested interest in either, and that would be the national government. But the Supreme Court used that concept against most efforts by Congress to regulate local conditions. They were like, okay, no, like if it's a local matter, leave it to be a local matter. So that continued for quite a long time. And then 70 years after the Civil War, the Supreme Court finally enabled businesses to enjoy the benefits of national policies promoting commerce. So the Supreme Court fought for a very long time for like the states' rights. But as our economy grew and as we had more national businesses and not just little local mom and pop stuff, right? Like when you start getting into a national company, they can't just be regulated. I mean, in some ways, yes, they can be regulated separately. Like they have to go by, like whatever state dumping laws there are or whatever. But for tax purposes and things like that, like they, there's also a certain level of, stuff that just has to go through the national level when they're dealing with like multiple states. Goodness. But the court also shielded businesses that regulated commerce by protecting consumers and workers. So they protected the businesses more than the employees for a hot minute, which is part of why it took so long for things like a minimum wage, a 40-hour work week, unions to fight for those sort of things. So when the New Deal came into play, to try and clean up a lot of what was happening as a result of the Great Depression, it shifted the sort of power that the federal government had, or national government had. So state and local governments struggled to handle the demands that was brought on by the Great Depression. 25% of the people who were working were unemployed by 1932, and the market crashed in 1929. People were on the streets, people were living in shacks, and people were barely surviving. So Hoover was the president, and he kept trying to leave it up to the states, but the states just weren't equipped because it was such a large national crisis. So FDR ran on like, hey, I'll fix this, and here's my plan to fix it. So he got elected in 1933. And pledged for a more active federal government to handle those problems. There were a lot of different things that the New Deal did. It expanded the scope of federal government. One of the largest and most effective New Deal programs, the Works Progress Administration, employed millions of Americans in projects like constructing highways, bridges, and public parks, which then, helped expand us as a country and modernize a lot of things as well. So through that immediately shifted what we had in the way of federalism. It was no longer dual federalism, with the fact that the national government was taking a much larger role to clean up the Great Depression. So, so there were some different things that came about as a result of the New Deal. One was grants and aid. It's programs through which Congress provides money to state and local governments on the condition that the funds be employed for purposes defined by the federal government. So we'll give you some money, but you got to follow these rules to be able to get that money. Okay. So, so some of the grants and aid programs were a lot of social programs, help people be able to eat, be able to survive at the time. Eventually it got to the point where like that's how we get our like school lunch program, based on your income, whether or not your kid gets free or reduced lunch. And highway construction played into that as well, because that was part of our expansion and part of like our economic growth as well. And so those were all programs that like the federal government gave money to the states for. Obviously, highway construction, when you start crossing state lines now, like, okay, well, we need to set this path, like y'all got to work together on this, like here's some money, make sure that you're using it for what you're supposed to use it for, that kind of thing. So so there were a couple different types of grants. There were categorical grants, which were congressional grants given to states and localities on the condition that expenditures be limited to a problem or group specified by law. We have a lot more categorical grants now than we did when they were initially implemented. So we started out with $2.3 billion worth of categorical grants in 1950. And then in 2019, we had an estimated $667 billion in categorical grants. That makes it hard for me to breathe. I can't even like fathom that level of money. But it's basically incentivizing states to do certain projects that, like benefit the whole. So with these grants and aid and the categorical grants, we basically shifted from the dual federalism system to cooperative federalism, which is a type of federalism since the New Deal era where grants and aid have been used strategically to encourage states and localities without commanding them, just encouraging them to pursue nationally defined goals, also known as intergovernmental cooperation. So political scientist Warden Grodzins used a cake analogy to be able to describe this type of federalism. So national policies, state policies, local policies ended up overlapping in a lot of different ways. So dual federalism would be like a layered cake, right? And there's no crossover. You know, like here's the first layer, here's the second layer, here's the third layer. But there's not like blending, right? It's you handle your thing, we'll handle our thing. But cooperative federalism is more like where's the picture? Marble cake here on the right. Dual federalism on the left, cooperative federalism on the right. So there's some stuff that national government handles, some that the state handles, and then a lot of it that they work hand in hand together on. Okay. So figure 3.1, which is on page 75. This shows you how grants and aid have continued to increase. So, you know, Medicaid falls under that, different healthcare systems, things to like take care, help bridge the gap for the people who need help taking care of themselves for whatever reason. So, and that started all well and good, and everybody was kumbaya and like, thanks for the help, thanks for the money, thanks for the encouragement of, you know, to try and go by your goals, but not being on my butt about it, to, yeah, we're going to be on your butt about it. And so in the 1930s, we had cooperative federalism, but by the 70s, we're like, nope, we're going to make you do it. So regulated federalism took place after that. It's a form of federalism where Congress imposes legislation on states and localities requiring them to meet national standards. So with more money from the national government, they demand more, right? Like they give you more, so they expect more in return. And they really tighten the belt on what the funds could be used for. So that sounds all well and good, but it ends up causing a lot of like gridlock too. So, so what ended up happening with the regulated federalism is it became like a carrot and a stick sort of situation. We've got money for you. You want the money? We're going to need you to do these things first. Aren't you hungry? We're going to need you to do the thing first, right? Oh, you want $20 to go out with your friends, go joyriding, go to the movies, get some food. Of course, you can't do any of that for just $20 anymore. But, you know, oh, well, I need you to cut the grass. Oh, I also need you to take out the trash. Oh, I need you to drop off your little sister to her friend's house on your way to do that, right? So that's like the whole carrot and the stick thing, right? So those national standards took over a lot of regulation, and it also emboldened the national government, made it an even larger entity. And we started seeing things like preemption, which is a principle that allows national government to override state and local actions for certain policies. So, so that lessens the state authority, right? So basically when state or local actions don't agree with national requirements, and then the national government can step in and say, you're not following the rules to get that money that we gave you for the thing. So state and local governments often contest preemption. For example, in 2019, California and 22 other states sued to keep their ability to set stricter vehicle emission regulations in place because they were loosening them at the national level. In my opinion, I would say that those states actually did the right thing. The national government had it backwards, right? Like we've got to protect the environment. And so, yeah, I agree with that. Makes perfect sense to me. So that federal regulation, I'm sorry, the regulated federalism, I got it backwards, definitely rubbed people the wrong way, right? When dual federalism ended, it was a huge blow for states' rights and for people who advocated for states' rights. So state rights is the principle that states don't have to submit to national laws. Now, there's a little give and take on that, right? Because the Constitution says that like national law is the supreme law of the land. But the Constitution also makes sure that there is separation between national and state level governments. So the states have rights as well. So former Vice President John Calhoun actually argued for what's known as nullification. He proposed that states were not bound by federal laws that they consider to be unconstitutional, which is like backwards from the way the system is actually set up, because it's the Supreme Court, which is at the national level of government, who decides what's unconstitutional, and the judicial system in general. So, so that's kind of interesting, right? Calhoun was a slave owner and a white supremacist, so not really a buddy, right? Not really a good guy. His political positions were often informed by his support of the expansion of the institution of slavery. So some of that was he didn't want the federal government telling him he couldn't own slaves. So what a tool. So anyway, so that was our former vice president. Not really a good guy. Nullification sounds stupid, especially when you read about who it came from, right? So in the 1950s, when we're in that cooperative federalism, we haven't really gotten to regulated federalism. People who oppose civil rights because they were white supremacists and they wanted to be top dog, they brought back concept, so sorry, of states' rights to defend segregation. They touted something called the Southern Manifesto, where they declared that Southern states were not constitutionally bound by the Supreme Court decisions outlawing segregation. Of course they did. So it's always got to be us Southerners. We just can't. It's always Florida man, and you know, we just can't do it right. So with the eventual triumph of the civil rights movement, the slogan of states' rights became tarnished by its association with racial inequality. By the 90s, however, it saw a revival in the interest of the 10th Amendment and important Supreme Court decisions limiting federal power. Much of the interest stemmed from conservatives who believed that a strong federal government encroached on individual liberties. They favored returning more power to the states through the process of de-evolution, which is listed in this chapter. So states' rights, not really popular after it was basically associated with being racist, right? That's not, you know, and anybody who's like, oh, somebody could be for segregation, not be racist. No, like, because separate but equal thought process is inherently unequal. People can't be separate because the person who is being separated from the others is inherently being told they are not equal. So it just doesn't work. Segregation is just, the idea of it is obviously incredibly flawed. So the Supreme Court ruled that Congress had stepped over its own authority with two different court cases. So the United States v. Lopez, which was in 1995, stated that Congress had exceeded its authority under the Commerce Clause, struck down a federal law that barred handguns near schools. This was the first time since the New Deal the court had limited congressional powers in this way. Now, if only they had a magic 8-ball, right? Because, or a crystal ball. As we know, fast forward, right? It wasn't long after 1995 that we started having school shootings with Columbine. So maybe in this particular instance, the Supreme Court shouldn't have pushed back on that, because now there are a lot of handguns and different types of guns near schools, because it's up to each state. And now look at all the shootings and the death we've had. So I don't know if that was helpful or not. So the idea, since regulated federalism came into play, of de-evolution has become increasingly popular. So the definition of de-evolution is a policy to remove a program from one level of government by delegating it or passing it down to a lower level of government, such as from the national government to the state and local governments. People who are in favor of de-evolution say that it's because states need to be allowed to be innovators and experimenters of policies within their states and what works for their individual citizens. And good ideas from one state can possibly spread to another state and utilized in their policy making, which is known as policy diffusion. So there's been a push for like the national government to let go of some of their authority to be able to do that. So one of the things that people say would be helpful for de-evolution is block grants. The definition of block grants are federal grants and aid that allow states considerable discretion in how the funds are spent. So less like carrot and the stick and more, we trust you to make your own call. Like, we'll give you this money. You say you need this money for this thing. We're going to let you do that. President Nixon actually pushed for more and more block grants to try and increase state government again, as part of his new federalism, the returning of powers to the states approach. So new federalism were just attempts by President Nixon and Reagan to return power to the states through the block grants. So that was an effort to get away from regulated federalism and to go to what they were referencing as new federalism. Congress also provided assistance to state and local governments through what they call general revenue sharing, which is the process by which one unit of government yields a portion of its tax income to another unit of government according to an established formula. Revenue sharing typically involves the national government providing money to state governments. So those were ways that the government was looking to try and basically shrink down the national government a little bit again. Reagan took block grants to return more power, but he also did so to cut federal spending, which Nixon wasn't focused on. The Republicans controlled Congress at that time. Reagan was a Republican, so the votes were definitely there. They continued to support those block grants to help cut federal spending more. One of the things that came out of that was what's known as the 1996 Welfare Reform Law, delegating states to have more and newer different responsibilities that they hadn't had in a while. So so you can see on page 78 and 79 that they're discussing all of that. And then they start talking about other ways that we try to lessen federal government. So this image says the federal government frequently passes laws that impose mandates on states, such as the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, which protects against discrimination based on disability. States were required to pay for changes to meet federal standards for accessibility in public transportation and public facilities. So one of the things that occurred as a result of people arguing for more state government control to try and push for the innovation and diffusion that we had talked about just a minute ago in the book was like just a more hands-off approach by the federal government. So for the innovation function, an example of that was Minnesota creating charter schools in 1991. They were the first people to do charter schools. Now 44 states and DC also permit them. Florida's one of those. And diffusion, Massachusetts healthcare reform in 2006 became the template for the Affordable Care Act in 2010. So that's showing ways in which like the state government created something new and influenced other states and even the national government to say, hey, that's a good idea. Like, let's do the thing. A lot of times states complained about what was known as unfunded mandates. So that's a law or regulation requiring a state or local government to perform certain actions without providing funding for fulfilling the requirement. Like, okay, you got to do this, but I'm not paying you for it. Like, like when you've got a chore in the family, but you don't get like an allowance. No, it's your job to take out the trash. You contribute to the trash, so you're gonna take it out. No, I ain't paying you for it. You live under my roof. I pay, like, you live here for free. Like, like that kind of like concept, right? So for example, in 1973, there's a federal law prohibiting discrimination against the disabled, required state and local governments to make the public transit accessible, like that picture was saying, but there was no funding for it. So the states had to figure out a way to be able to pay for that. So those are problems that really fueled a lot of like national and state tensions, because the states felt like they were having more and more put on them, but they were not getting the assistance to achieve those things. And the federal government felt like, these things aren't getting done unless we like implement these things. So it was difficult for them to come to a middle ground. One of the things that causes continual tension that we hear all the time on the news is immigration. So when Trump was president, he signed an executive order expanding the types of immigrants considered as a priority for deportation. This included convicted felonies, multiple misdemeanors, just like Obama had actually, and those accused or convicted of minor crimes as well. Several cities, counties, and states declared themselves sanctuaries to limit their cooperation with federal immigration enforcement. Trump, in turn, pledged to withhold federal grants from these jurisdictions, but a federal judge said, no go, you can't do that. You can't punish them for disagreeing with what you're implementing. So that was a federal to state conflict, right? Like whether or not they felt like what he was doing was justified and legal, and whether or not they had to follow it. So there's a lot of pushback for that. Marijuana is another thing that we hear about again all the time, so much, right? So in 2005, the Supreme Court said that Congress had the right to ban medical marijuana, even though 11 states had already legalized its use. The Commerce Clause gave the federal government the power to regulate use of all marijuana. However, by 2018, 33 states and DC had said, suck it, we're doing it anyways, and had legalized medical marijuana. And as we know, it has continued to show up on ballots. More and more states are approving it. And the national government has been sort of, like when you ask for that toy in the store with your parent and you just keep wearing them down until they're finally like, fine, you can have it. Just shut up. I don't want to hear any more about it. And don't you ask me for nothing else. Like that's all you're getting, It's the same kind of like concept, right? Like the national government has they're not making it as big a fight as they used to. And a lot of people believe that it's only a matter of time before medical marijuana is legal in all 50 states and territories. So with this legal confusion, medical marijuana industries began to flourish, and a number of states went further by legalizing recreational marijuana as well. So a lot of people actually believe that all forms of marijuana will be legal before it's all said and done, And honestly, like it would benefit the government because they could tax the crap out of it. And I know that sounds terrible, but they can tax alcohol, they can tax tobacco. Like economically speaking, it's better for the government to be able to regulate it and make it legal than to make it illegal, which also makes it more appealing to people who just like want to break the rules too. Like, not that they need it necessarily, not that people don't need it, but for the people who don't and they just want to do what the man tells them not to do, right? So so a lot of people believe that it's only a matter of time before that will be approved across the board. So we'll see. So we are now at page 81 for who participates in local elections compared to national elections. So more people tend to participate in national elections than local elections because people have this misconception that the president affects their day-to-day life more than their local elected officials. There are a lot of people who only vote once every 4 years. They only fill out the one for president and they leave everything else blank. And it kills me. It hurts my heart, people. Not that it's not an important position to pay attention to and to elect, but like your mayor and your city commissioners affect your day-to-day life and your governor way more than the president does on a day-to-day basis. So the light blue is ages 18 to 29. So they're like the lowest age bracket, which we've talked about before, regardless of what they did. 30 to 49 is the green, 50 to 64 is the orange, 65 and up is the red. So the older you are, the more likely you are to vote, which we've talked about. So the first one says attended a local government meeting in the last year. So the middle, like 30 to 64, like they're more likely to attend something like that, which is interesting. And then within the last 5 years, if you kind of average it out further, it's still the older group, and then voted in the 2018 national election. And then for recent municipal elections, they picked some of the larger cities: Chicago, Seattle, DC, Detroit, Denver, Houston, San Antonio, New York City. New York City is slacking 7%. 7. That's all who showed up for their city elections. Ain't that some ish? That's messed up. Chicago and Seattle, like they got it going on, even DC. And you get to New York City, 7%. That's a shame. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. That is just a sad, sad number. So, but that kind of gives you a breakdown, and we will see different numbers like this throughout the book. And it's always like the older they get, the more likely they are to participate. And then younger people are frustrated because nobody asks for their opinion on anything when it comes to politics, but they're not showing up the polls to give their opinion. So why would anybody ask for it? So if you want to be heard, you got to show up. So let's see. So this is as of 2018. This is a breakdown as of 2018 for marijuana laws across the states. Sorry. While buying, selling, and possessing marijuana remains federal crimes, states have adopted policies that conflict with federal laws, should this be allowed. The dark green, medical marijuana broadly legalized, light green, marijuana legalized for recreational use, and then gray, no broad laws legalizing marijuana. So a lot of the South, with the exception of Florida, like we broke away. We were like, nope, we're doing medical marijuana and we don't care. A lot of the more liberal states are like, let's do it. I'm actually surprised with Alaska, but they're like, man, we ain't got nothing to do but like hunt bears and try not to get frostbite. Like, let's warm up by smoking. So that's kind of interesting. But so that's the breakdown. That's kind of where we are. But more and more people are accepting of it. It's becoming less politically heated. And so as a result, it's just not becoming a big problem anymore. So I would be surprised if we didn't get to a point of like just national legalization across the board where it's recreational or medical at some point. So as a result of this sort of like tension and headbutting between national and state governments, some different policy outcomes have occurred as a result. So conservatives who claim to favor small federal government have actually expanded it at times. People say conservatives are small government, liberals are big government, but conservatives and liberals are for whatever government gets their goal achieved. Plain and simple. If big government does the job, conservatives are going to be on board at the time because it benefits them. If small government works because it benefits them, then liberals are going to be on board. And that's just how it works. So, for example, conservatives passed the U.S. Patriot Act during George W. Bush's and Republican-controlled Congress after 9/11. It greatly increased surveillance powers of the federal government because we passed a lot of things out of fear and paranoia after 9/11 occurred. And as a result, it took away a lot of our civil liberties that we have been kind of fighting and pushing back on since. And that's one of them. No Child Left Behind was also passed by a Republican-controlled Congress, which increased federal intervention in public education as opposed to leaving that to the states. And those are both conservative measures, but expanded federal government power. This says, despite the Charlotte City Council's ordinance prohibiting sex discrimination in public facilities, state preemption allowed for the North Carolina legislature to pass the Charlotte Bathroom Bill, which undid the provisions originally set out by the city council. So it basically undid what the city was trying to do. So basically they were trying to prohibit discrimination when people were using public restrooms, you know, like if you identify as whatever sex, like people need to leave you alone about it. And then the state legislature changed that. So, and that has, you know, that's been a lot of the civil rights issues that you see now, in addition to reaffirming the problems that we've been having with Black people being targeted, just like we had in the supermarket recently. We also had it in a church not long after that, where Black people were being targeted solely because they're Black. Like, so like the civil rights movement isn't over for that group of people, and they're still fighting, as well as their allies. And now we're also seeing a lot of people in the LGBTQ community fighting a lot in the same way for their own civil rights. So there's a lot of that happening right now, and some pushback with the government, some support from the government. It all depends on the state, and then at what level the national government steps in. So let's see. So before I get to the public opinion poll, the last page of the chapter, page 84, which you can see right here, got the same pictures from the first page. It says, federalism, what do you think? Is federal government endangering people by allowing states to certify corona testing labs? Are some of the issues on states, of which states differ, should they be uniform across the country? And then there's some other questions too. Just like I've mentioned before, these are always great after you've gone through the chapter to sort of apply it to real world situations and feel out like, okay, well, the book said like, this is how it's supposed to be with these questions. Like, how should those be answered? Like, how should it be to be in alignment with our government? So, like I talked about before, the role of national government has definitely increased from our dual federalism to our new federalism. So do you think it's possible for the United States, given its large geographic space, population, and influence on the rest of the world, to have a smaller government? And to some extent, that's subjective, right? Like, and some of that depends on your views on small government or large government and what works best. As we've become more of a global economy, like not just United States, but like, on a global scale, obviously. And as we all work together in a more global light, some of the larger national government has become sort of inevitable because states are not allowed to create treaties. They're not allowed to negotiate on commerce and stuff with like other foreign entities. And there's just a lot of things that are done like on a national level with other countries that can't be done at a state level. And so like internationally speaking, like our national government has to be stronger. And then there has been a lot of conflict where states are not following the immunities clause, they're not following the full faith and credit clause, and the national government has had to step in. So in some of those like social ways, there has had to be more pushback from the national government. But then like the unfunded mandates and things like that can cause a lot of problems. So I think like to some extent, like we have to have a larger government than originally was intended, but maybe we don't have to be D-bags about it. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe we don't have to be jerks. Like the national government doesn't have to be like a jerk to the states to do it. Like the unfunded mandates, like that's not cool, right? So maybe there's just better ways that we could go about it instead of being like petulant children all the time. Crazy concept. I know, let's be grown-ups. So considering the current distribution of power and authority between the federal government and state and local governments, do you believe we should A, provide the federal government with more power and authority, B, provide state and local governments more power and authority, or C, maintain the current distribution of power and authority between governments? Again, this is a subjective answer based on how you feel about states' rights or national versus state power and that kind of thing. Not really like a right answer, not a wrong answer. It's just your own opinion. Number 3, which level of government do you believe is best able to protect liberty, equality, and rights of all of its citizens? State government, federal government, local government, or a combination of the 3? For me personally, I definitely think it's D. I think when we're a cooperative federalism system, it works better. Like it works better when we're a team, right? As opposed to just doing our own thing or one totally dictating to the other. I think in all aspects of life, like cooperation and give and take are more effective than all or nothing systems. So number 4, in the coming years, do you believe the power and authority of the state government will increase, remain the same, or decrease? And again, that's subjective on what you think. And a lot of that depends on who's in power, right? Number 5, in the coming years, do you believe the power and authority of the federal government will increase, remain the same, or decrease? Same thing. So, so this is a great little segment in your book. Let me go back to it here. On pages 68 and 69, make your voice heard at a local meeting. These are fantastic if you want to get more involved. If there's an issue that you really care about, like you want to go to your city, commission meeting and find out what the deal is about, like the, massive crater-sized rut in your road that's not been paved or whatever, right? So, so it says, number 1, figure out which governmental entity has jurisdiction over your issue and get on its agenda, right? Like if it's a rut in your road, like, are you in city or are you in the county? Like that, determines who you need to talk to. Do the research on your issue, like make sure that you have your stuff together before you go up and say something. Number 3, prepare your statement. They usually limit your time, so you don't want to ramble on and on and on. You need to be like prepared to be like precise and to the point. Number 4, follow up. Don't just speak your piece at the meeting and be done. Follow up with your mayor, your council members, whatever, to make sure that things are actually getting done. And it helps to build relationships with local officials because you're more likely to get something done if they know who you are. Number 5, consider that collective action may be even more powerful. Like one voice screaming in a room versus 20 voices screaming in a room, what's going to be more effective, right? So the larger the group of people, the larger and more succinct the voice is going to be. So if there are other people who are affected, then like by all means get a group together. Number 6, work across the generations, like work with people, like older people, work with the younger people, like work with whoever it affects, because then you have a more wide array of people in your corner, which also helps to achieve your goals. And number 7, work with the federal system as well, or work the federal system. So, so that is a really, really important read. Like I just read the highlights, but feel free to like read over that if you're interested in doing anything like that. It's very helpful. So, so that is our lovely chapter 3. So, real quick, as always, make sure that you look at the study guide. Let me see the study guide. Okay. Study guide for chapter 3, pages 85, 86, and 87. You know, go over the questions, go over the key terms. I try to remember during the lecture to say, hey, you'll see this again, but I mean, really, anything I talk about, anything the book talks about, anything that's in whatever I post, in theory can be on the quiz and can be on the exams. Now, I have sent you guys the study guide for exam 1. So follow that. Like it's literally pulled right from the questions. Like so like if you have all the answers to that, you will ace exam 1. And remember, you have Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday starting at midnight on Monday all the way through 11:59 on Wednesday. Once you log in, you have an hour to do it. It's 25 multiple choice questions and 1 short / like essay answer, like you write until you feel like you've answered it sufficiently. And that's worth up to 10 points. The multiple choice questions are 3.6 points a piece. 25 times 3.6 is 90 plus 10 is 100. So that's how you get to 100% for exam 1. So all of you, but like 1 or 2 people had, like as of before I started doing this recording, had done all of the assignments for week 1, module 1, which awesome. You guys are on top of it. Great job. So you're familiar with how things are worded and stuff based on the quizzes. It's going to be similar to that you'll see on the exam. Some of the exact same questions you'll see again. So if you have watched all the lectures, you've read the chapters, or at least like, you know, followed along with me in the lectures, done the study guides and the books, taken the study guide that I gave you and like make sure you got that down pat, like you will have absolutely no problem acing this. Specifically, like that study guide that I emailed you guys, like take that, fill it out. If you can answer and you can say, okay, I know what this is, I know what that is, I know what she's talking about here, then you'll have absolutely no problem excelling in the exam and it'll be fine. So you have through the middle of the week to do that. And module 2 opens up. I've got everything to open up at 8 a.m. on Monday. So like, I wouldn't even like stress about module 2 until you have done exam 1. So that way you're not getting information all mixed up. Like focus on the exam, study, do what you got to do with it because it's a much smaller chapter or much smaller module this week. Like get the exam done and then you can focus on module 2, which is just chapters 4 and 5, civil liberties and civil rights. So it's just going to be those 2 quizzes. And then like next week, not like the week we're in now, but like the following week will be an exam on just 4 and 5. So it'll be super easy. Like you guys should breeze through this next week. Make sure that you're not forgetting to start working on your discussion board though. because you have until like the middle of the semester, like till week 4 to do that. So now we're about to hit week 2. So since we've gotten through the first crazy week with a lot of stuff, and now we don't have as much like each week in assignments, you should be taking advantage of that time now and working on the discussion board. So make sure you're not waiting too long on that, because that's a large chunk of your grade. So, and that's due at the end of like week 4. So then that way you guys have like weeks 5, 6, and 7 to do your responses. And then that way I have week 8 to grade all of that. So that's it. That's the end of module 1. So yay, you guys survived. You're awesome. We're all awesome. We're doing great. Everybody's grades look phenomenal. You guys are doing excellent on like the quizzes and on like the comprehension of stuff. Like nobody's like just bombing away. Like everybody seems to be grasping the material well. So I'm expecting to see the same thing on exam 1. I don't think you guys will have any problem at all. As always, feel free to let me know if you have any questions, if you need help with anything, if, like if there's something that doesn't make sense, if you're struggling with anything, like don't hesitate to get up with me and let me know. And make sure before you get everything started that you follow the instructions on how to set up Respondus. It's no note, no book allowed on the exam, but you won't need it. I promise. Watch these lectures, answer the questions on that study guide. Make sure you've got that study guide, like that's Bible for you for the next couple of days. You get that down and you will be golden. So you feel like you need the notes, but I promise you, you really won't. It'll be fine. So let me know if you need anything and we'll talk soon. Bye.